Okay, great. Had to stop for a second to record the meeting. Wanted to make sure other people had access to it. So, good morning and happy Friday. One more Friday, and then we have a week off. Woohoo! Anyway, so welcome to the fourth grade coaching session. We've got a few things to talk about today. We're going to go over the literary nonfiction reading unit and some changes to that, as well as the personal narrative and the prompt-based personal narrative writing units. All right, so here are our upcoming units of study. We have literary nonfiction that begins December 9th and goes through January 10th. And we have the personal narrative writing unit, which begins as soon as we come back from Thanksgiving break on December 2nd and goes through January 10th, and then followed by the prompt-based personal narrative. So today, as I said earlier, we're going to be discussing these three units and just making sure we have the essential understandings and what we're expecting the students to be able to do at the end of these units. So one of the ways for literary nonfiction is we need to get your room ready. Let your librarian know, look through your Journeys level readers and get them in your library or on your table. So here are the TEKS for literary nonfiction. It's 4.7, and the heading is Understand, Make Inferences, and Draw Conclusions about Literary Nonfiction. And underneath that is also 4.7a, which is the students are supposed to be able to identify similarities and differences between the events and characters' experiences in a fictional work and the actual events and experiences described in an author's biography or autobiography. And if you'll notice, when you're looking at the assessed text for literary nonfiction, it has it only under reporting category 1, which is the uh, connections, where they will be a part of a paired passage. But we haven't really seen that yet because last year's, or the 2013 STAR test that was released, did not include a literary nonfiction for fourth grade nor in fifth grade. But it seems like the TEKS say that it should be only in a paired passage, but we don't know that for sure. So just make sure they know it well. You do have, we'll go here. What this means is for STAR is that it's a biography or an autobiography. So we don't want to confuse literary nonfiction with narrative nonfiction. So according to TEA, what they're considering literary nonfiction are the biographies or the autobiographies. An example that they released, an example passage that they released in 2011 was the passage, The Lady Who Loved the Land. And they coded that as literary nonfiction. So just to get an idea of what they're talking about, that would be a good one to go back and look at. STAR question stems that were on the released sample from 2011 were the following, and it also includes media literacy, which you can see at the bottom of the last bullet point on this slide. If you look at the TEKS or the stems, you can see that it's pretty much a lot of inferring, and of course summary. Summary is huge in all the genres. So if they can infer in fiction and nonfiction, they should be able to do the same as well in literary nonfiction. In this unit, the new lessons that were created for this year are some media literacy questions along with a teacher modeling passage and some guided passages. So also, there's some author's craft lessons in there. It includes an opening lesson that is like an overview of what author's craft is. If you've already done that type of lesson in an earlier unit, which I think you have, you don't have to do that one again, but there is one that's specific to literary nonfiction in this unit. So be on the lookout for that as well. So that's about it for literary nonfiction, or those two items. And going on into the personal narrative, This is really important here, and there's some great information in the unit itself, in the beginning parts of it, in the Roman numeral sections, which is the preface part. And it goes into much more detail than I can include here on a slideshow, nor do you want me to include that here. But this particular unit, it provides a connection between students reading and writing. And it emphasizes the idea that learning to write is accumulative, that what they do next builds upon what they've done before. And the read aloud is critical to this personal narrative unit because you're going to be doing an immersion section. In fourth grade, there is a mentor text that we've asked earlier grades not to use, that it's reserved for fourth grade, and that's 11 by Sandra Cisneros. However, in fourth grade, you can use the ones that they have for second and third grade because they've already seen it if you want to revisit something. And that's included in the unit on Roman numeral 5, page Roman numeral 5. And there's a homework listing in there because there's several mini lessons in the unit that refer to homework and suggest that they collect some ideas. However, homework policies are at the campus level and agreed upon during team planning sessions. It should be consistent with those that were established in the first 6 weeks. So if you don't do homework, that's fine. Just wanted to make sure that you understand that it lists that in the mini lesson, but it's not a requirement. It's only there if that is something your campus has agreed to do. The framework of this personal narrative unit has 5 phases, which you see here on this slide. And the first phase, which is the immersion phase, it's where they are going to explore this by using mentor texts, picture books, etc., etc. And they'll spend a large part of their time reading these texts in the writing workshop and gathering ideas for writing. They want to make, it's natural that you want to make examples of personal narrative available at the beginning, but they've got to be able to do it throughout the course as well. So even though we may have passed phase 1, please continue to allow them to continue that exploration. And then phase 2, of course, is where they generate ideas in their writer's notebook. And then the project planning, which is phase 3, they're going to reread those entries and looking for those ones that they can grow and spend time with. And then, of course, they start their drafting and revising. And then finally, the editing and the celebration, which is always so much fun. Resources for personal narrative. It's kind of difficult to find an actual personal narrative that's published for children. Typically, by the time they get to be the publisher, they've become a fictional story or they're considered a memoir. So, and there's a great definition and explanation of the difference between a memoir and a personal narrative in the unit, which I would suggest you look at. So with that, we have included some literature suggestions, and that's on Appendix B to use as mentor text. And these are really critical to use with the students so they get an understanding not only of how they can make it more interesting, but exactly what is a personal narrative. And the importance of mentor text was really brought home to me when I was working with a student, and I do some tutoring sometimes, and this student is or was a third grade student last year, and he is a really wonderful, wonderful storyteller. But sometimes he goes into making up things. Like as soon as he gets started orally, then he's making up fantastical things. But either way, he was having a hard time getting any of it down on paper. So I read him this first page of Al Moon, which you see here on the page, on the slide, and it's about describing the setting, the sensory details of the setting. But it's not like I felt, I saw, I heard. This is a really good example of using your sensory language or using your senses to describe something. And so I read this to him and I said, I want you to think about, because what he had been writing about, he wanted to write about field day, but of course he wanted to write about the whole field day, which of course is not what we want them to do. Um, and so I said, well, let's focus in on the one activity that day you did that was really interesting. And he was relaying a story about they were doing a relay around the track and they had to, switch off the batons and about how one of his teammates fell and et cetera, et cetera. So it's like, okay. So when he wrote it, it wasn't exciting. And I gave him this and I said, I want you to describe the setting, as you were there. So he said, okay. He says, can I make a bulleted list? I said, whatever you want to do, just get some thoughts down on paper. So this is what he wrote. And as you can see, he has some struggles with spelling, but that's okay. And he goes, heart racing, clapping, screaming, middle of the day, warm, bright colors, sweat, neon colored cones. And I said, okay. I said, we're going to keep this list. And when we meet next week, you're going to write a paragraph from that. And he stopped and he looked at me and he says, can I just say it out loud right now? I said, sure. So he says this paragraph to me, which I'll share with you in a moment, out loud. And I was like, oh my gosh, we have to record this because I know he will never get this down on paper if it's not recorded. So I grabbed his mom's cell phone and we recorded this next thing. And then he wrote it from the recording. And this is what he wrote. He says, my eardrums were hurting from screaming. My heart was racing, and the only other thing I could hear was clapping. It was in the middle of the day, and it was warm. All I could see were bright-colored shirts lined up. I could feel the sweat running down my body, and I could see bright-colored cones guiding our way. Well, I don't know about you, but I was pretty bowled over because this is a kid that hates to write. And yes, there's some things that need to be done with this, but we didn't revise it. This is just the first thing that came out of his mouth with this list. He was looking at the bulleted list he had created that you saw on the first slide as he came up with this. And you could see him, he was just working through the process and going down his list, and this is what he came up with. So it sounds nothing like Al Moon. It's his own story, but he was using that type of craft move that the author was doing and applying it to his own writing. And it's very, very powerful. Next thing that it talks about with the personal narrative is strategy groups. And we need to be doing more strategy groups with our writers because there are, pockets of kids that need help with this and another group that needs help with this. But it's a way to really effectively address all of these needs with students in a more timely fashion is a strategy group. And if you look in the preface section on Roman numeral page 13, there's a listing of mini lessons from the Crunch Time Strategies unit that are really good to use to pull kids together in a small group to work on these common things that you see here. So please, keep an eye out for those kids that have these common needs. Pull them together to the floor during independent writing and let's work on that together. Just using, ideas from those lessons. You don't have to teach the whole lesson. Just use that strategy group. Also, another important point in this unit, there's a mid-workshop teaching point listed after several of the mini lessons in the unit. They're just connected to that lesson because it might be something that's related to that lesson. However, these do not have to be taught in that order or with that particular lesson. Just know that they're there and look through those, and you can select them according to the needs of your students. It's just to give you some ideas. You might have some of your own ideas and they don't have to be used. It's just an additional resource for you to have in the middle of the workshop, especially if you can see they're getting antsy and tired and they're not really doing anything. Stop it, mid-workshop teaching point, just right there where they sit and go on. It sort of refreshes them. And also at that time, you could also choose to extend that day's mini lesson if it's something that's taking them more time to master, that's fine. Or if you're seeing they didn't really get it, you might need to reteach that with if the majority of the students are having difficulty right there in the middle of the workshop. The next unit, prompt-based personal narrative. This is really, really important. You can use the 2012 Personal Narrative Scoring Guide writing samples for instruction. It's located on the TEA website. Do not use the 2013 scoring guides. The reason for this is we will be using that prompt in the benchmark in the mid-year. So we do not want them using those and getting those examples prior to the benchmark. So please only use the 2012 scoring guide writing samples to share with the students with this unit. And this is where you can go through and you're teaching them the rubrics and all that. And this gives you some samples to use. Again, it's imperative that you do not use the 2013 scoring guides. And this was mentioned in the writing training. We've been saying it a lot. Julie put up something, you know, the guy with the mug shot. Don't use it. Okay. So best practices with any of the writing is to dust off your writer's notebook. We need to see more teachers writing in their notebooks to have examples of seed idea lists and entries for explicit modeling during the mini lessons. We need to move away from assigning them a task and do more explicit modeling. And then, of course, you can use that notebook when you're working with strategy groups and when you're conferring with students. And again, model, model, model. Let them see the process that you go through. And of course, important additional components for our fourth grade writers are the revising and editing invitations, which we started new this week. We will have another one coming out hopefully later today for next week. And of course, differentiated word study. Not all students are on the same level spelling stage, just like they're not all on the same reading level. So we need to meet them where they are. And typically where they are on the reading level is where it's aligned pretty closely to their spelling level. So we need to have that differentiated across the district. And of course, we do Words Their Way is our district adopted word study program. So I didn't get a chance this morning to fill this in, but I'll tell you, our next session is January 8th. And of course, I'll send out a reminder email. And the topic is going to be poetry and more thinking across genres, those connections lessons, and poetry writing and revising and editing. Again, that's January 8th. And I think that's it. If anybody has any questions, I guess we don't. You can type them in. Oh, I see someone's typing, so we'll wait for a moment. Rubrics. Okay, let's see what the question is on rubrics. And we'll all, because those are always a good question. Using 20. You mean the 2013 scoring rubric? Yes, you can use the rubric. We just don't want you sharing with the students the samples from 2013 because, of course, that prompt is what they're going to be writing. And we do not want them practicing that prompt prior to being presented with that prompt on a benchmark. Yeah, okay. So sorry, I didn't mean to confuse you. I'll go back and look at that. But yes, you cannot use the writing samples from the 2013 scoring guide. The rubric is fine. And of course, the rubrics included in the personal narrative unit that are kid-friendly star rubrics. Anything else? All right. Well, I want you to have great holiday coming up after next week. Enjoy your weekend. And if you have any questions or problems, please just feel free to email me. Okay. Thank you so much. Have a great day.